This webinar series is a collaboration between Canada's History Society and the Shingwauk Residential Schools Centre. The Shingwauk Residential Schools Centre is a grassroots, community-based archive managed by Algoma University and the Children of Shingwauk Alumni Association, a residential school survivor group. The Centre is dedicated to preserving the history of the Shingwauk Residential School as well as the history of residential schools across Canada, with an emphasis on telling history from the survivor and intergenerational perspective. To learn more, I encourage you to go to their website, and I've just pasted that in the chat box on the right-hand corner. If you are watching the recording on YouTube, all the links mentioned in today's webinar will be pasted in the description down below. Canada's History Society is dedicated to promoting greater popular interest in Canadian history, principally through our publishing, education, and recognition programs. To learn more about Canada's history, I encourage you to go to this link in the chat box on the right-hand side. So at this time, I would like to introduce you to Krista. If you've joined us for a previous webinar, you are familiar with Krista as she has been the co-host for this series. And today she's taking over as a presenter, as she will also next week. So if you haven't been with us, I will give you a bit of information about Krista. Krista McCracken is a public history professional currently working as an archive supervisor at Algoma University's Arthur A. Wishart Library and Shingwauk Residential Schools Centre. Krista lives and works on Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory in Bawating, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Métis people. Krista's research includes the community archives, residential schools, and educational outreach. She is a co-editor of the popular Canadian history website, activehistory.ca. When she's not working, she can be found drinking tea, watching Doctor Who, and editing Wikipedia. We are very pleased to have Krista with us here today, and I encourage you to join me in welcoming her. Thank you, Krista.
Thanks, Jessica, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So today we're really going to talk about how to get started with Wikipedia and where folks can start editing Canadian history content on Wikipedia. So just kind of as an outline for what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the assumptions behind editing Wikipedia, the ethics behind editing Wikipedia, how Canadian history and Wikipedia intersect, and then also where you can get started contributing to Wikipedia at home or at your place of work. So just to start things off, there is this kind of, not necessarily misconception, but the common thing that comes up when people talk about Wikipedia is this idea that because anybody can edit Wikipedia, that it doesn't have value. And I really think this isn't a valid reason to dismiss the medium. It really just suggests that there's only a certain type of person that has the capacity to share and generate knowledge, and that if it's not coming from specific people, that knowledge doesn't have value, which I don't think is true. There's a lot of people who have knowledge that are not part of like a university or exist outside of the academic realm. And so one of the nice things about Wikipedia is that it is open to everybody and that knowledge can be shared through it. Also, Wikipedia really emphasizes synthesizing information in a clear, concise manner. And that's actually a skill that is relatively difficult for some people, especially academics. And the approach of Wikipedia is something that many people could learn about in terms of reaching audiences beyond traditional academic fields or traditional museum fields. And also one of the benefits of the fact that anybody is able to edit, it means that things like language, typos, poorly written text, or inaccurate information can also be fixed by anyone. So it's not just one single person that's responsible for making sure everything is perfect on Wikipedia. Everybody can kind of chip in. In terms of GLAM professionals, so people who work in galleries, libraries, archives, museums, as well as public historians or public history professionals. Those individuals are well positioned as subject experts, and the skills that they use every day in their jobs can really transfer over nicely to improving Wikipedia, contributing information to Wikipedia, and correcting content on Wikipedia. So for example, librarians and archivists and museums, many of those institutions hold clipping files with undigitized secondary source materials, so things like newspaper articles or biographical information. Those records are ideal for establishing notability on Wikipedia. Many public historians and GLAM professionals also know how to do secondary source research. They know how to write material concisely. So thinking about the skills that are required to write an introductory text for an exhibit, or creating artifact labels, researching historical biographical sketches, or public presentations, things like that. Those are all skills that can be directly transferred to Wikipedia. They're all about disseminating information clearly and concisely. In my view, Wikipedia really just is a different form of outreach. Archives, museums, and libraries are often looking for different ways that they can reach different audiences, and Wikipedia is just another form of digital outreach. It's also a way that folks can animate their collections, put them out there for wider audiences beyond who's able to physically come to their locations. And it's a way that they can balance institutional goals sometimes with larger community-based activism goals. So I talked a little bit about providing information in an accessible format. So in the case of GLAM institutions, there might be physical access barriers to people coming to visit the physical location, or there might be more complicated access barriers, with things related to class, economic status, or education background. So thinking about if you are working at an archive that's, say, located in a municipal building or in a post-secondary institution, those spaces might not be welcoming to some folks, particularly folks who aren't information aware as to how they can go in there and access things. There might be material, or if that material is publicly accessible. So Wikipedia is a way that you can share information in a publicly accessible way, but it also means that, so thinking of you're sharing that information in a space that is open to everybody and kind of reaching people where they are. So I'd kind of argue that Wikipedia is a form of community outreach or community-based public history. You're helping make information accessible. Wikipedia is the 5th most popular website, English language website in the world. So it's putting material out there that's accessible way beyond the reach of most cultural heritage organizations. One of the major criticisms of Wikipedia is that many of the articles on Wikipedia are from a Western point of view, from a male point of view, from a cisgendered point of view. And I think some of the work that public historians, that people interested in Canadian history can do is really working to diversify the historical narrative that's available on Wikipedia. So even the language used on Wikipedia tends to be gendered. So articles about women tend to be focused on their relationships with men or other family members and not based around their individual achievements. As people who are interested in a representative Canadian history, we can definitely help change that. We can change the narrative. We can highlight marginalized community histories and really just use our historical knowledge and our historical research skills to help build up some of that community-based history, some of that history that we know about, but that might not be accessible to everybody. So currently on Wikipedia, only about 17% of biographies are about women, and only 10% of Wikipedia editors identify as women. though the identification of gender of editors is somewhat difficult, so that percentage could be anywhere as low as 8% and as high as 15%. Just kind of as an example for some of the articles that are typically edited on Wikipedia. So Wikipedia has something that is called the featured article. So if you go to wikipedia.org, the featured article appears on the main homepage and it rotates every day. In the past week, the articles featured on the main page have included an article about a heavy metal band, the 2012 Tour de France, the dire wolf, which I'm guessing is because Game of Thrones just came back on TV, and there's also an article about a World War II battle. So I'm kind of pointing these out not just to talk about the feature article selection process, but also to highlight the types of articles that people spend time on developing to get them up to the quality that Wikipedia deems acceptable for featured articles. One of the reasons for those articles receiving so much attention is if you look at the interests of editors, that's what they're editing. So they're editing things related to their interests. Actually, one of the most popular or most frequently edited articles on Wikipedia is related to a pro wrestler. So I think there's a lot of work that Canadian historians can do to change that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific examples. So in the case of Canadian history, things like Indigenous history, female Canadians, and people of color in Canada, their histories are horribly underrepresented on Wikipedia. So recently, an attempt has been made to change some of that. So what I'm showing here on the slide is the table of contents of a Wikipedia page relating to Indian residential schools in Canada. The table of contents on the left represents what the table of contents looked like about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and the one on the right-hand side is what it looks like today. So an archivist who works in Ontario named Danielle Robichart put a call out on Twitter and social media, as well as just talking with some of her colleagues about wanting to work on the Indian residential school Wikipedia article, because she felt that the actual history of residential schools was really important for Canadians generally to know, and that history was largely not being represented in a fair way or in a historically appropriate way in the Wikipedia article. So she reached out to folks and asked if they would be willing to help contribute to the article. So multiple archivists, librarians, historians, museum professionals responded to her call and actually have worked heavily on adding new citations to this article, flagging racist language that was used in the article, and generally just expanding on the information there so that it talks about the student experience, for example, in residential schools, and not just talking about the federal government's approach to residential schools. So this is just kind of one example of how historians or people interested in history can actually have an impact on Wikipedia and an impact on the knowledge that Canadians generally are receiving about aspects of Canadian history that are important. In the case of the residential school article, you can actually look up stats of Wikipedia articles to see how many times they've been viewed by people. And for example, when Gord Downie released The Secret Path, there was a huge spike in people Googling and then ending up on Wikipedia about the history of residential schools. And so I think it is really important that information relating to Canada's history is correct on Wikipedia and that those facts are being interpreted by people who have some knowledge related to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my personal motivations for editing Wikipedia, just because we're going to get into some of the ethics or Wikipedia principles of editing. So in my mind, Wikipedia can really be used as a way to do the work and for me to use my white settler privilege to help talk about issues that are important in Canada today. So for example, marginalized communities should not be expected to teach the basics of colonialism, racism, settler colonialism to the general population. So historians are really starting to confront the role that they have played in colonialism and confront historical narratives and challenge histories that have been presented to the general public. And so I think some of the work that can be done through Wikipedia is to create representative historical articles that reflect the diversity of Canadian history, but also reflect the diversity of people who live in Canada today. And one of the kind of tricky things with that is making sure that you're balancing your personal reasons for editing Wikipedia with the Wikipedia guidelines that are set out by the website itself and by the Wikipedia community. So those guidelines, there's some core editing principles that are kind of the foundation of Wikipedia, and that's that editing should be done with a neutral point of view, that material that you're using should be verifiable, articles should only be created about notable events or notable people, and that as an editor, you should avoid conflicts of interest, and that the content that appears on Wikipedia should be free and anybody should be able to use, edit, or distribute it. So these are really broad-ranging topics, and if you look at each of them, you can see that they're open to interpretation. So who decides what is neutral? Who decides what is verifiable? And who decides what is notable? It's a tricky question, and there's not one answer to that. The idea being that Wikipedia is a community, and so working together, people will decide what is notable, what is verifiable, and if articles kind of come up to a neutral point of view or not. There are examples of each of these on Wikipedia's website and kind of guidelines for editors. So in terms of avoiding conflict of interest, you shouldn't create an article about yourself, about immediate family members, or about something that you're very heavily emotionally invested in. It's best to maybe let somebody else create that and then you help edit it afterwards. One of the things that I would suggest to folks who are interested in getting started editing in Wikipedia is that it's really important to build yourself a support community or find like-minded editors. So this can be particularly important when we're talking about establishing notability. So making sure that there's other people who you can work with to make sure that the articles you're putting on Wikipedia are going to pass review and that they're going to stay up there and not get taken down. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. So I'd also like to emphasize that there's multiple different ways that folks can contribute to Wikipedia. You don't have to create pages from scratch to make a valid contribution to Wikipedia. So editing pages or just adding citations can also be really valuable. We're great at secondary source research as GLAM professionals or as historians, and often there's articles on Wikipedia that could really benefit from people going in and adding citations to them, cleaning up language, for examples, or just working to add things like ISBN numbers and cleaning up formatting, things like that, that are part of practices that a lot of historians know really well. And doing some of those smaller edits can be a huge confidence builder for new editors, but it can also be something you can do that's provides you with a sense of accomplishment without having to sit down and take all the time required to build an article from scratch. I know that starting to edit Wikipedia can be a bit intimidating, but one of the nice things about Wikipedia is that there is a ton of resources and step-by-step documentation to guide you through how to edit. There's a lot of policies that can seem overwhelming, but there are also a lot of visual guides that show you like pictures of what your text should look like. But I also like to emphasize that you're learning a new skill, and that learning how to use Wikipedia, it is really a learning process. It's a skill. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. I think you just need to put those mistakes in the context of the fact that you're learning, and that those mistakes are valid, and they're something you can move forward and build upon. I also think it's important to talk about the fact that you can often make a case that using Wikipedia is a valuable skill and is something that you can talk about in your workplace. Maybe you work at a museum or a heritage institution and you're interested in creating a Wikipedia page for your institution, or maybe you're looking at ways that you can showcase some of your collections through Wikipedia. And those are all possible. I just think you need to talk to people that you work with and approach them about that option and talk about why it's a valid form of engagement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about editing Wikipedia that isn't based around page creation. We'll get to talking about page creation in a minute, but just because I know how busy folks are, and sometimes it's nice to be able to do something that's just going to take a couple of minutes versus sitting down for multiple hours. For example, if you're creating a really detailed page, being able to do something quick can be really rewarding. Also, doing editing that is smaller can be a nice way to enter into the Wikipedia community without having to create something from scratch. So there is one campaign that directly targets librarians. It's called One Lib, One Ref. And the idea behind that campaign is that if every librarian in the world contributed one reference to one Wikipedia article, it would hugely improve the content that's on Wikipedia. So this is an annual campaign and an annual event that runs for about a month every year, and really just with the goal of encouraging librarians to use Wikipedia and to specifically focus on updating references on Wikipedia. And I think adding references is a nice, simple way to become involved in Wikipedia. There's a template for creating citations. So if you're not comfortable coding or using Wiki markup language, it's a way that you can contribute. And if you know how to craft a citation, you can definitely do it on Wikipedia. One other thing that heritage organizations can do to contribute to Wikipedia is adding public domain images. Wikipedia, its principle around free and open content means that any images that are associated with Wikipedia articles need to be in the public domain. So you could either upload them directly to Wikipedia and attach them to articles, or you could upload them to Wikimedia, which is kind of the counterpart to Wikipedia, but is specifically for images, and then draw them in something to an article that way. I know adding public domain images is sometimes a way that different heritage organizations have made their collections more accessible through Wikipedia. So if you have a lot of photographs that are out of copyright, that are in the public domain, you might be able to add them onto Wikipedia that way. One of the other ways to get involved in Wikipedia is through Wiki Projects. So Wiki Projects are kind of like special interest groups on Wikipedia. And there's basically, if you're interested in something, there's probably a Wiki project for it. So one of the ones that relates directly to Canadian history is called History of Canada. And it's for broadly Canadian history, and they always have running lists of things that need to be worked on, articles that need cleaning up, articles that need better citations, articles that they wanted people to create. So it's a nice community centered around Canadian history on Wikipedia. So if you're looking for like-minded editors or for different articles to become involved in, that's a good place to start. If you're interested in increasing content related to women in history, Women in Red specifically focuses on creating new pages related to women. They usually have a theme every month, so sometimes For example, recently they had a month that was dedicated to female artists, or the month prior to that was related to women involved in sciences. The Indigenous Peoples of North America project also focuses specifically on Indigenous heritage and creating articles related to that. And like I said, there's pretty much a wiki project for any interest. So for example, if you are a grammar nut, the Wikipedia project Punctuation project, there's an entire group dedicated to just improving punctuation on Wikipedia. So if you are really dedicated to your semicolons, that's the place for you. So like I said, like there's tons of different ways you can contribute to Wikipedia. And I think it's just a matter of finding what's the best fit for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different ways that GLAM organizations or people who are involved with history-based organizations can contribute to Wikipedia. So I think I talked a little bit about, for example, adding images as an option. There is also a specific citation you can use if you are doing work with archives that can be added into Wikipedia articles. So what's up on the slide right now is a screenshot of what the site archive template looks like. One of the nice things about this template is it makes it easier to identify where archival material is located. So if you're researching and want to include that information, it makes it easier for other researchers to find it. One of the things that I would caution about using the site archive template is, in addition to using it, you really need to combine it with other secondary sources. Wikipedia relies heavily on secondary source research. It does not really approve of new research, or as new scholar, original research, as a valid citation. So the site archive can be used to supplement, but it shouldn't be used as the only source for an entire article. Okay, so it just gave you a ton of information, but so where do you start? If you want to edit Wikipedia, I would really suggest creating an account on Wikipedia. It is very simple. Go to the main, pretty much Wikipedia homepage. Over on the top right-hand side, there's a little bar that says login. You can click on it, and then just click on create an account. So all you need to create an account is you have to come up with a username and you have to come up with a password. You don't have to include any personal information. You don't have to include your email address if you don't want to. You do have the option if so desired, but that's it. And basically you enter 3 boxes and you've created an account. That's really the first step to start getting involved in editing Wikipedia. One caution is that Wikipedia discourages multiple users using the same account. So you can't create an institutional Wikipedia account. They need to be individual accounts. I would also suggest that kind of as your first foray into editing, you play around on your user profile page. So that'll pop up right after you create an account. And it's a space where you can pretty much do whatever you want. So if you're looking at ways to kind of introduce yourself to editing, it is a nice safe space that no one else can see it other than you until you make it live. So if you just want to get used to what the Wikipedia layout looks like, it's a good kind of introduction to that. So after you've created an account, you kind of need to decide whether you want to use the visual editor or the source editor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between those. So the visual editor is rich text editing or uses what's known as WYSIWYG style editing. So if you've ever created a blog or used a CMS system, so if you've used WordPress, for example, its default is to use a rich text editor. It's pretty intuitive to use. It's very visual focused. So it has a lot of the same kind of tools as if you're editing a document in Word. So if you want to bold something, you can highlight it and click the bold button. It's also really good for quick edits or basic page creation. And it's a really easy way to become involved in Wikipedia if you don't feel comfortable learning wiki markup or don't feel super comfortable with the idea of learning a coding language. So on the other hand, so you've got the visual editor. On the other hand, you have source-based editing. So this one does use a coding language that's called Wiki Markup. So Wiki Markup's kind of this weird mishmash of different programming languages. It has a little bit of, HTML thrown in there, but mostly it's just its own kind of distinct markup, and it does have a ton of documentation about how to do everything. There is a little bit of a learning curve with it, but it does offer more functionality once you get involved in it. For example, there's something called talk pages on Wikipedia, and they can't easily be edited with the visual editor, but they can with the source editing option. So as far as first steps go, I would suggest folks start by editing an existing article. It's sometimes easier to do that way instead of getting overwhelmed with the idea of creating a page from scratch. There's also something called a user sandbox or the draft article template. So both of those are spaces where you can create content without it being kind of published to the wider Wikipedia community. So if you're just learning how to put material together, it's a safe space to use. Once you've kind of played around a little bit with those editing options, I would really encourage you to think about what article you want to pick or what topic you want to pick for the first article you create from scratch. There is kind of a huge temptation to create your first article about something you're really passionate about. A lot of reasons why people get involved with Wikipedia is they see a gap. They see something that they really think deserves to be on Wikipedia and that they want to create an article for, which that's a totally valid reason to become involved in Wikipedia. But it's also, it can be really tricky if you're very passionate about an article, very emotionally invested in it, and it's your first article, because you're probably going to make mistakes. There's a higher chance that some of your edits might be reverted. So how I would suggest folks to go about picking the topic for their first article is pick something you're interested in, pick something you like, but maybe not something that you are super passionate about. So kind of something in the middle. That way, if your edits get reverted or there's challenges around getting it approved by people, you can treat it more as a learning experience. So it's a little bit more arm's length. One of the other suggestions I would have is before you actually sit down with your computer to write the Wikipedia article, is do some of that secondary source research in advance. So thinking where all your sources are, you could maybe even draft a rough bio or an outline of how you want to write information in a Word document. That way, when you actually sit down to edit Wikipedia, you don't have to worry both about the content and the formatting. You already have your content ready, and then you can just go into Wikipedia and figure out how you're going to format that. Okay. So in terms of where you can learn more about some of the basics of Wikipedia, so like I mentioned earlier, there is a ton of documentation around the Wikipedia edited. If you're curious about how you should format things, how you enter an image, how you upload audio files to Wikipedia, you can always Google that and it will probably come up right away. You can also use this search through the help pages on Wikipedia. I would also suggest that people look for a Wikipedia mentor page per se. So this could be someone you know in real life that is involved in Wikipedia that you can shoot questions to if you have if you get stuck in any way. Wikipedia also has a adopt a user program. So if you don't know anybody in real life, they do have a virtual mentoring program that kind of pairs new editors with more experienced editors. That way you're not going it alone. There's also something called the Tea House. So that's a place where if you have a question around editing, you can just type it in and more experienced editors will help answer your question. The Tea House also has a bank of past questions asked. So there's a good chance that somebody else has had the same problem as you, and you can always go through the frequently asked questions to look for information on how to proceed. They also have a chat function or a chat channel that offers very similar help to the Tea House, but it's in real time. So if you're in the middle of editing an article and need a response fairly quickly, the chat channel is one option there. There's also a specific culture guide or a guide on Wikipedia for culture professionals. So anybody who works at a museum, a library, gallery, or archives, the Culture Professionals Guide can be particularly helpful, specifically if you're looking to navigate conflicts of interest, or if you want to create a page about your own institution, things you should keep in mind. That's a really good guide. The kind of last option that I'm going to point out in terms of where you can learn more, if you are not a fan of sitting through reading documentation, there actually is a gamified way to learn about Wikipedia. So the Wikipedia adventure is kind of like a video adventure game. Well, not super video intensive, but you go through it and you can learn about all the steps to editing, but it's in kind of a gamified, fun environment. So you have lots of options for learning about Wikipedia. And additionally, next week during the webinar, I'm going to be talking about some of the more kind of nitty.
Thank you, Krista. That is incredible. While you were talking, I made my own account on Wikipedia. I guess I'll edit as Historic Nap. I've noticed both yourself and Amy mentioned, the name that you use to edit on Wikipedia. Is there something around that's a thing that editors do? They share their name?
Yeah, especially as you build more of a community of editors. There's some folks who edit on Wikipedia really heavily, but don't necessarily reveal their personal identity. So sharing your editor name is one way to connect with other people if you don't want to reveal where you actually live and things like that. It's also a way that if you're interested in collaborating on articles, you can say, you can find me using this username on Wikipedia, and people can see what you've contributed to recently.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So at this time, we will be having a Q&A. So if anybody who's listening has a question for Krista about her presentation or about editing Wikipedia more generally, I encourage you to submit it in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner. I obviously have a few questions of my own, so I'll get the Q&A started while everybody's typing. Thank you, Krista, for already answering my first question, and thank you for this great presentation. I actually really feel motivated and ready to sit down and find my secondary sources, but I guess I have to pick something to research and contribute to first. So I'll get to that, I guess. We'll go to Sylvia first. So just to summarize, Sylvia's wondering about how appropriate would it be to put that social justice work done by Project of Heart Regina on Wikipedia?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Sylvia. And there's actually a couple different ways that I could see this being put on Wikipedia, and I think it is appropriate to go on there. So one way that it could end up on Wikipedia is by creating a page around the Regina Indian Residential School itself. Because it does have heritage status, it would be definitely notable as a page. Also, many of the other residential schools that existed across Canada, there's a number of them that have their own Wikipedia pages already. So that's one option. And in that page, you could talk about the commemoration and the social justice aspect. One other way that I could see this making it onto Wikipedia is actually just creating a page related to Project of Heart, because nationally it is really significant and has been a huge commemorative project and social justice project across the nation. So, and there's also a ton of news articles written about Project of Heart. So that notability is definitely already there. So I think there are a couple different options, and I think it would be a great thing to add to Wikipedia.
Thanks, Krista. Sylvia Smith echoes. I did just do a quick search, and Project of Heart is not already on Wikipedia, Sylvia, so we've got some work to do. Krista, how can you make the case for notability of local historical events or people?
So, as I mentioned earlier, Wikipedia really uses secondary source research to kind of verify notability. So the easiest way to kind of get something on Wikipedia and not have it challenged in terms of notability or verifiability is looking to see if there's already material published about it. So are there news articles available about it? Has it been mentioned in the media generally? If you do an internet search, does other stuff come up about it? That kind of makes it an easy way to get it on Wikipedia because it already has established notability. One other suggestion is if there's a community history event or a person you're interested in having a article written about on Wikipedia, is work with more experienced editors if you think it's a controversial topic or if it's about, say, a marginalized community, because those editors already have kind of the reputation or the strength to make sure that the article gets approved and can kind of help prevent some of those cases of things being deleted.
Thank you. So I think this might have been something that Amy brought up, or one of our previous presenters, but the prioritization or the editors preferring digital sources to print sources. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So there is a preference that if the source exists digitally, that you link to it, which I think makes sense in terms of making material accessible. That being said, if it is a print source that was published, so if it was a book or a newspaper or a magazine that, I don't know, might have been published in the 80s or 90s and there's no online presence of it, you can definitely still use that as a source because it is considered a valid secondary source. The only case where it gets a little trickier is if it's, for example, like a dissertation or an archival record that would be more original research, that using that as a source on Wikipedia, it really needs to be supplemented by something else.
Great, thank you. So have you found the Wikipedia community to be a supportive place for new editors?
So I myself really haven't had a lot of problems with harassment or things getting reverted without cause. That being said, I know that does happen to some people, and one of the reasons why some studies have shown that women don't feel welcome on Wikipedia is they don't feel that it's a welcoming community. Be that because of the language used in it or just not that collective community of supportive editors. So I think one of the things that can help with that is really building the community that you want and seeking out like-minded editors, or like I mentioned earlier, becoming involved in a Wiki project that is near to some of your interests can help. So I know one of our presenters earlier in this series, Jade, talked about their experience editing queer history on Wikipedia and things getting reverted very quickly, and their response to that was declaring themselves a queer member of Wikipedia and then being able to reach out to other career editors so that when an article was being challenged or was up for deletion, that they had other people they could reach to. And I think that's really important in terms of community building. And if you are experiencing unfriendliness on Wikipedia, or if there's an editor that seems like they're just being unusually cruel or approaching the harassment level, Wikipedia does have actually a pretty tight code of conduct, and you can report people. So there are options to making sure that you're in a safe space and that it is a welcoming space.
Thanks, Krista. That's really good to know that there is a process that can be started when you are faced with those types of experiences. And as we've talked about in the last 3 webinars, the gender balance in editors is there isn't really a balance there. And being in those situations, it's good to know that there is support for female and non-binary editors. And my last question for you is, how can Wikipedia be used by GLAM professionals to enhance the reach of their institution? So a good example of that might be Canada's History's Wikipedia page. To tell you the truth, I don't know the state of it, so I'm going to have to go take a look. But what do you think?
Yeah, so I think it is a valid way to increase the profile of your institution by creating a Wikipedia page for it. But I think it is really important to remember that a Wikipedia page should not merely replicate the content that is on your website. So it shouldn't just have content around like when you're open and closed, where you're located at. For institutions like museums or archives, one thing that can kind of make your Wikipedia page more vibrant is talking about the founding of it, talking about the history of it. If there have been significant donations of collections that are related to notable figures, that material can be added to the Wikipedia page. Another way that I think is almost a better way for cultural heritage organizations to use Wikipedia is if they have material in their holdings that could be used to talk about specific individuals. So say you're an archive that has a fond or a collection related to an author, chances are you have some of that biographical information that could be used to create a Wikipedia article about an individual. And then in the Wikipedia article, you can build in citations that point back to your website, that point back to your holdings. So things like that, that you're using the resources you have and making them accessible, but not necessarily just on your own institutional Wikipedia page. Similarly, another great option is if you do have those public domain images, adding them into Wikipedia articles with links back to your collection is another way to go about it. One other thing that can be used as a secondary source, so things like historical biographical notes or finding aids or collection descriptions, if those are accessible through a museum website or an archives website, those can be considered secondary sources and you can link to them through Wikipedia. So that's another way to kind of drive traffic to your website and also create the visibility.
All right, thank you. I would like to take this time to again thank Krista for her presentation, and we'll see Krista again next week, but also for co-hosting this series with me. I am really excited about starting to edit Wikipedia, although I feel like it might be more of a winter activity for me. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but with the sun so deep... Okay, I have a last question, Krista. Do you find, is there more editing happening in the winter than in the...
I think that's a tricky question because Wikipedia is a global community. So the winter and summer months kind of change depending on where you live. I know personally for me though, it really fluctuates depending on my schedule. So there's definitely times of the year where I have more time to edit. So I think that's probably the case for most individuals. Though I get your point about summer and winter. It kind of makes me think of knitting. I always want to knit more in the winter versus in the summer, but that's
Okay, I'll save the rest of my questions for next week. I'd also like to thank everybody who is here listening to today's webinar. Thank you for coming out and sharing your interest in editing and contributing to Wikipedia. We definitely think it is a space where the Canadian public and academics and public historians and GLAM professionals can be and can contribute to. We all have different areas of expertise, and if we collaborate on the time that we all have, we can make a difference in how Canadian history is represented on Wikipedia, and that would be a really cool thing to see. So this is the third webinar of 4 for the Wikipedia as Outreach and Activism for Canadian History webinar series. So if you liked today, you can come back next week and watch next week's webinar with Krista, as I've mentioned, and you can also watch the last 2 webinars, the last previous weeks.